Hey everyone, this is Mike. Today we're going to be taking a look at Skul the Hero Slayer. This is a roguelike game that is currently in early access and it came out a little bit earlier this year, around February if I'm not mistaken. But I decided to not pick up the game until now because at the moment it is, I believe, 30% on discount on Steam because of the Steam summer sale. So I decided to give it a try. It also currently has a collaboration with Dead Cells, so you can actually play as the Dead Cells character in this game as well, which is looking pretty cool so far. Now, when it comes down to the premise of this game, you're playing as Skul, a little skeleton, and it is your job to go save the Demon King, because the Demon King has been abducted by heroes in their castle, and you basically want to go and get him back. There are a couple of things that will work towards permanent progression in this game when it comes down to like passive upgrades and such, as well as giving you some starting items when you go into the dungeon the next time around. And then of course you have a bunch of things that you can pick up whilst you are in the dungeon itself. So let's talk about all of those things right now. First of all, let's talk about the permanent progression. So you have this purple currency, which are like purple gemstones that you can spend on your upgrades as well as some starting items. In the hub town, or in the castle as it is, there's three different NPCs. We have the witch, which will allow you to upgrade some passives, like for example bonus magic damage, bonus physical damage, more HP, like lower cooldowns, those kind of things. There will also be a couple of really big upgrades in there as well, but they are going to be extremely expensive, like for example giving your dash iframes. Normally your dash doesn't have iframes, so even giving them a few ones is going to be quite a big difference in playstyle, so there's some really cool upgrades that you can get right there. Other than that, we have two other NPCs. We have the fox that will give you a starting skull, which I'll talk about that mechanic in just a second. And then we have the ogre that will give you a starting item. You can also pay them gems if you want, and then you can get a second skull from the fox and a second item from the ogre. I'm not 100% sure if you can buy more because I just haven't really spent the gems on them, as I'm just saving up to basically max out all of my passives first. Now, big mechanic of this game is all about the skulls. It's the name of the game as well as the name of your character. So how does it work? Well, basically, rather than having one character that has a bunch of different abilities, or you going through the dungeons and finding new weapons, new abilities to equip right there, you basically have these skulls, and each skull is kind of like a character on its own that has their own passives and abilities. And they also come in different rarities, so sometimes you'll be running around with just a bunch of common skulls and your gameplay will be rather boring, but every now and then you'll find that epic great skull, the one that is really special with all of their cool abilities, and then you'll be having a blast. So the difference in between running around with like boring skulls and having a skull that is kind of like of the highest rarity is going to be quite a drastic difference in gameplay, because of course the higher rarity skulls are so much more fun to play with. So that kind of makes it so that whenever you're not running around with them, you might not be having as much fun, although I do have to say that every skull works in their own way. Of course, some are better than others, because that's just how it works with like the different rarities that are available to you. But on the other hand, it does make you come back to the game to always try to find those epic great skulls, because they're just so much fun to play around with. Pretty much every one of the epic skulls that I have found so far have just been a blast to play with. I've got some gameplay of the Grim Reaper in the background, I believe, because I wasn't recording when I had the other ones. But there's basically a couple of really cool ones in there, and they all just feel fantastic to play with. And even so, even some of the lower rarity skulls are still pretty fun to play with as well. To me, as long as it feels great to play with, then I am totally fine with it. Now, when it comes down to the abilities that the skulls have available, there's a couple of different ones. Now, the first important one is that you can hold two skulls at a time, so depending on the situation you can switch between them. Now, whenever you switch in between your skulls, they will also have a switch ability. Sometimes this might just be a backstab, or it might just be doing some damage, or it might be using their ability as like they come into play or something like that. So when you swap, you get a skill as well. And then usually each skull has a unique dash, like sometimes it will just be your normal dash. Some of them will have a more unique one. Normally you can dash twice in quick succession, some will only make it so that you can dash once. But then there will most likely be some kind of an extra effect attached to the dash, like doing some damage, stunning enemies, something like that. Other than that, of course, each skull type, because that's very important as well, has their own specific set of basic attacks, and then of course the movement that is attached to it. But depending on the skull type that you have, you might also have different abilities. So for example, take the water skull, or aqua skull I believe it is called. Normally it has, for example, a little tidal wave that it sends out, and then it kind of drags enemies across. But you can also get a different aqua skull that looks and feels exactly the same, but instead of having a tidal wave ability, it has kind of like a, oh, what should I call this? Like basically a point blank AoE ability instead. So your different skulls, even though there are different archetypes, so to speak, they might still have different abilities inside the same skull archetype. Like for example, the Jinn that is there can either have an ability that makes him invulnerable and then hit the enemy 3 times while he's invulnerable, but the other one, for example, is that he turns into a genie lamp for a few seconds, become invulnerable like that, and then come out as a very big genie and then just do a big punch like that. So skulls might feel the same, might look the same, but you also need to make sure that you have the right abilities that you're looking for as well. Now, as you go into the higher grade skulls, you also get a second activatable ability that will basically add some extra gameplay elements to the skull itself. So that's kind of like what you're going to be looking after, and that is the main gameplay trope of this game, where you're going to be trying to collect skulls that feel good together, or that just feel good themselves. Like for example, if you find one of those epic skulls, then you're just mainly going to be using that one most likely because they just feel so incredibly powerful. And then of course there's a couple of other things that you can find. So when it comes down to going through the dungeon, there are a set amount of levels that you go through before you find the shop, then of course find the mini boss, and then fight other bosses as well. So there's always that set amount of levels. Now, as you go through the levels, there is some RNG skewing that you can do yourself to get the floors that you want. So there are 3 different types of floors. You have the skull floors, which will award you with a new skull at the end. You will have a gold floor that just gives you a bunch of gold. And then you have an item floor that will just give you a random item. There's also activatable items in the game, by the way, which will usually have a passive attached to them. And then when you activate them, they of course give their activatable effect. Can be something like summoning like a pet or something like that, like a pet dragon that will breathe some fire. Could also be just like increase your attack damage and add a burning effect or something like that. Very different items out there as well. Now, in between these 3 floors, you usually get to choose. So when you finish a floor, you have 2 gates at the end, with in the middle your reward of that floor. And then you just basically get to choose which one you want next. So for example, if you're trying to find the right skull for you, you can just always take the skull floor. If you want more gold, you take gold floors. If you want items, you take the item floor. Now, of course, you can only choose 1 out of 2. Because there's only 2 choices at the end, even though there's 3 different floor types. But sometimes one of the gates will be broken down, so you only get 1 choice, or well, you basically don't get any choice at all. So it kind of depends, you gotta get a little bit lucky with RNG there as well. But it is still pretty nice to see that there is a choice every now and then, or more often than not even, I should say, than just like always going through the floors and you're just getting whatever the game gives you. So it's pretty cool that you can do that as well. When it comes down to the shops, they usually offer a new skull, depending on if you have some or not. They also allow you to heal up a little bit and give you some passive upgrades. There will also be a vendor that gives you a buff for the next few floors. And then there will also be a vendor with a couple of items that you can go and pick up. Of course, you do need to make sure that you have enough gold for them, so that's why it can be useful to visit the gold rooms every now and then as well. All in all, I think that the gameplay experience of the game is pretty fun. It's pretty addicting, to be honest, because like I only picked it up a couple of days ago and I already spent a couple of hours in the game. Because it's quite easy to just keep coming back. You always want to try and find those epic skulls. Even though I've only found like 4 of them so far, I believe, in my 3 or so hours of playing, 3-4 hours I think I've played the game so far. But you basically just keep coming back to try and find more of them, or to find the same ones again, because they just feel so incredibly satisfying to be using, and then the whole game just kind of flows relatively nice together as well. The permanent progression is really good, because you start off with only having the witch available to you, and then as you progress through the game, as you get further down the dungeon, you also unlock those 2 extra NPCs, and getting like a second skull to start off with is already a pretty big upgrade. Getting an item at the start is pretty nice as well. And overall, I think this is a pretty nice game. Should you pick it up at the moment right now? I'm not quite sure. It depends if you want to invest into an early access game, because of course the game is still in early access. What is right there right now is pretty fun to play. I'm definitely going to be playing it a little bit more. Runs also don't take crazy long. I think the usual run takes like 10 to 20 minutes or something like that. Well, for me at least, because I still die quite regularly on the earlier parts of the level, because the game is actually kind of tough. Especially if you're not used to the gameplay style of all of the different skulls and that kind of stuff, because I'm still experimenting with a bunch of different stuff. But yeah, the games don't last usually too long, because of course I do die quite a lot, but even then, if you make a full run, I believe it should take like half an hour or something for a full run. which is not crazy long for a roguelike, so I definitely enjoy the pace at which the game is going. And then of course we can expect a bunch more upgrades and updates to the game in the future as well, because it's still in early access, it is still being actively worked upon. And as I said, if you want to pick it up right now, it is on discount through the Steam Summer Sale. But that's gonna be it for this one. I want to thank you for watching, I want to thank my Patreons for supporting me, and I'll see you in the next one.